Hey class, this is Mr. Danner, and I'm gonna give you my first video for the class that really walks through one of our lessons. And so it's gonna be kind of a broad overview because I really want the thinking to be left on all of you. But I know some people are kind of already confused because it's a new class. I'm a new teacher to you, and a lot of you haven't heard me talk or been in a class yet. So hopefully you're watching this if you're not attending the classes. I know it's hard to get to some of the live classes, so not holding that against anybody, I promise. But I do hope that you can all get a look at these videos, which are meant to support the people who can't attend the live classes. So again, this class is developing Black historical consciousness, and I'm not going to get into everything that entails, but really we're trying to look at essentially like why and how just the racial experience in our country has been such a unique aspect and very difficult for a lot of people, whether a lot of people to experience or a lot of people to comprehend. And so I'm not saying that I'm an expert as a white male to talk through this, but I think we're going to all learn together, and I really hope that we can all interact and have these hard conversations. And so what we're really going to focus on throughout this class is whose stories are left out of history. And we're going to look at the lesser told stories and those viewpoints that you don't always learn about in a normal history class. And so we're going to start into the women's suffrage movement, but I'm mostly going to focus in on the themes of the class. But the first unit is going to be about the women's suffrage movement, and then how did African American women ultimately win full voting rights and protection. So here's some of the ideas and themes that we're going to look at in this class. And actually, I'm going to embed a different video that can talk through these a little bit better than myself. So keep an eye out for that, because these themes we're going to talk about as a class, but I want to give an overview from an expert. But the idea of power, oppression, and race, or racism, agency, resistance, and perseverance, because that's a major part of the Black experience in our country. Is just how Black people fought for justice, freedom, equality, and equity. And most importantly, the idea that the fight for equality and equity wasn't from weak or passive or uninformed groups. It was from people who were strongly willing to resist and persevere and just keep fighting and never give in. African diaspora, that's a term you're going to look at. So if you see these terms down below, look back to this first and then start looking things up as well. But just global Black history and how what that looks like around the globe, because it's not necessarily, the Black history in our country is unique, but it's not. There's also Black history in every country in the world that looks different, and so just understanding how it's different depending on where you are. Black joy and love, and so that's just a cultural piece that's going to be huge. And then intersectionality, that's going to be a major piece of the puzzle, and we're going to really get into the idea of just what are the multiple identities that Black people in our country have. It could just be being a Black and being female, because that's two different identities that you might have, or another just being a Black male who is gay. That's a good friend of mine has those multiple identities within himself, and he fights and struggles with how those identities affect him and how he lives in this culture in our country. So that's going to be a big part of this class, hopefully. And again, I'm going to be learning with you and doing my best to. And so here's some ideas, like I said, some ideas that we're going to focus on in this class. And what I'm going to look for is you to find like what do these definitions mean, and then kind of like what does that mean to you. And so again, as a white male, this term intersectionality, I can't necessarily intelligently use that and reflect on it myself, because it would almost be offensive for me to do that. But the word, and just go back up here. If you want, I'm looking for the definition, what that means to you. It's just, intersectionality is just understanding the multiple identities that inform Blackness. And again, that's why as a white male, I don't necessarily have to deal with this intersectionality. But I'll even let you do a little copying and paste in there. What does it mean? Now, what does that mean in your life? And so I can't speak to that in my life, but the example I gave was from a good friend of mine. So he's a Black male homosexual. I'm sorry, I can't type. Think about that for a minute, and just think about how that affects his identity. And that means that he has multiple pieces of his identity that make up who he is, and multiple pieces of his identity that may make him struggle in our society a little bit more. And so think about who you are and how that influences your identity. So that's intersectionality, and that's kind of an example. It's just like how does this what does this word mean in your life? Same with hidden histories, and I'll give you hidden histories. These are the stories that you don't necessarily learn in the textbooks. You get the general history of everything in your textbooks. Not that we use textbooks all that much, but just that broad overview of history. That's what, like, your hidden histories are like the stories that you don't hear about, the people you don't hear about. And that's where we're going to focus in. So what does that mean in your life? Like, what are some things that maybe you'd like to learn about, or some people that you'd like to learn about that that most teachers don't teach about? So that's what I'm looking for. Like, what does this mean in your life? So that's kind of like the example here. And it just goes on. Her stories. Agency. Look up what agency means as a and that's, I'll give you a hint that agency is the whole idea of just kind of like being willing to stand up and speak up, right? That's a simple term. So that's what I'm looking for there. Just kind of like, what's the dictionary definition? Then, like, kind of what does this mean in your life, or how have you experienced it, or how have you learned about it? Even you can put how you've learned about these things. So, shifting gears slightly, the first topic we're going to cover is voting rights. And so the 15th Amendment, this is great. This was right after the Civil War, about 8 years after the Civil War ended, and all of a sudden, the right to vote shall not be denied on account of race or previous condition of servitude. That means that it's not just white males who can vote anymore. This is great. Who isn't mentioned? Think about that. Is there any mention of gender? So you could have white females, Black females. What about Native Americans? Immigrants. None of them are mentioned here. Think about that. Okay, great. Now we're making progress. The 19th Amendment, on account of sex or gender. That's great too. Who could be left out here? Think about those groups I just mentioned. So we're going to look into the women's suffrage movement. Watch this short video from the History Channel. Pretty good overview, but still some groups are left out. So in the next 3 slides, and this is kind of like the last thing you're going to have to do, and I really want you to look at them separately. And I just want reactions, questions, or just observations about the pictures. Normally I'd have you just doing questions, but I just want your reaction. All right, and you're just going to type it into this box. Just what do you see? What questions do you have? What are some things you noticed? Just put 3, 4, 5 things that you noticed. And then I'd say, if you're watching this video, I'd pause it right now and just type those things in now, because I don't want you to look at the next 2 pictures until you've done that. So pause the video, type in those observations, noticings in your PowerPoint, and then we'll move on. And then you're going to do the same thing with this picture. Same picture. Questions, noticings, wonderings, observations. Pause the video, do the same thing. I think that definitely adds a different dimension to the picture, doesn't it? And then finally, so that's the last thing I'm asking you to do. And this is going to really lead us into our look at like kind of some of the hidden histories behind the women's suffrage movement. So hopefully this helps. As always, if you have questions, feel free to reach out, and I will see you all in class.